Hello and welcome to Pour One Out, where we're talking all things Warhammer today. I'm Thomas, joined by my buddy Jay, and we're going to be talking about little Angron. We're going to pour one out for old Angron today.
Poor Angron.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and specifically, we're going to be talking about the short story After Deshea, which is sort of the origin of Angron, his first encounter with the Emperor and his legion. We read it right before this recording to have it fresh, and it was the first time Jay had read it. So, Jay, what'd you think of it?
Well, going into it, I don't know enough about Primarchs to really gain a whole lot of insight that it probably would have provided to, those that are more well-versed, I guess, with, Primarchs as well as the Horus Heresy. But, I mean, just reading the story kind of like from the outside looking in, just simply the scenes that are portrayed, Angron is a beast, like literally seeming like he's like an animal, caged in like a dungeon, and then Karn and his buddies are like, bro, I guess I'm gonna go in now and let's try to get our Primarch back, and goes down there, gets beat half to death, probably like really just any regular person besides a Space Marine would be super dead. But yeah, and he's just like, dude, you're Big Daddy to us, man, and we will follow your orders. And I mean, it was interesting that the Warhounds, like the Astartes Legion, is just so willing to follow their Primarch to the point where, like, even if Angron, as we saw, eventually turns to chaos and or betrays the Emperor, but like he doesn't really have too much allegiance to the Emperor in the first place. That, I don't know, I guess it's not like it's the Astartes place to be like, oh, hang on, like, wait a minute, like.
Well, some do question the Primarchs in there that turn away from the Emperor, and those guys are all killed. I mean, the loyalists are definitely taken out. But talking about what you were saying, how Karn and his buddies before him, because they kind of went and like the people who went down there to try and get Angron to like calm down, which good luck doing that. They went like chain of command, whoever was the most senior. And the story opens with them even questioning, like, is Angron, like, he's our Primarch? Yeah, but, like, we might have to consider we got to get rid of him. I mean, one of us might have to lead the Legion. And then Karn goes down there. Karn, who is a huge character in 30K and 40K. He's a huge, figure, big Khorne guy. Karn and Khorne, right? Hand in hand.
Yeah.
But Karn the Berserker, whatever you want to call him. Karn the guy who got literally impaled on a rhino by Garviel Loken at one point and lives to tell a tale about it. I mean, he's a crazy dude. But he's the one who goes down there and is able to withstand the punishment as well as, like, deliver the message to Angron that they're his Legion, they're his sons. And it really shows you how loyal these Space Marines are to their Primarchs, who are basically their daddies. I mean, they love their daddies, and they're willing to kill for their daddies. They're willing to die for their daddies, be killed by their daddies. Talk about a great father-son relationship, Jay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I for one think it is a really interesting and telling short story in regards to both the character of the World Eaters as a legion, but also into the mind of Angron and who he is as a Primarch. And all of us 40Kers, we know that he ends up as a demon prince of Khorne. He's like an avatar of rage and violence and bloodshed. And when he is loyal to the Emperor, as loyal as he was, which we'll get into, that maybe he wasn't all that loyal to begin with, he was still a very violent and brutal person who was all about the bloodshed. And that was reflected in the Warhounds before they even, you know, became like led by Angron. There's this one part where they're talking about how for a long time before the Emperor said they couldn't do it, if any of their auxiliary, meaning like regular humans, like the Astra Militarum, if any of them were showing them dishonor, they would just kill them. I mean, allies. They would just brutally murder them because they weren't doing what they liked. So it gives you that sense that these legions really are so much like their Primarchs.
Right, right. Clear up one thing for me. Like, Primarchs were separated, I guess, sent to the different planets, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Before the recording.
By Horus and Chaos.
Mm.
Horus, I almost said Horus, like Chaos
Horus.
and Horus. They kind of like, the gods of Chaos kind of used Horus as a means to expel the Primarchs.
Okay. So Angron was sent to this, brutal world of, slave pit fighting, essentially.
He was a gladiator.
Right. But when Karn brings up the whole, scene where they're fighting the, intelligent mudworms or whatever, he's, recounting the weapons that they're using, and then he's like, we used bolters, we used artillery, we used, aircraft, and Angron's like, what is a bolter? And I was like, wait a minute, so I guess from Angron's inception, he just had no idea what the standard imperial weaponry was, I suppose. Was he sent that early?
Well, the thing is, all the Primarchs are in these kind of like these test tube things, and they're all just scattered across the galaxy, and they crash land on different planets, and as infants, as children, and they grow up on these planets.
Gotcha. That was my confusion. I was like, was Angron a fully grown Primarch, and then they all got separated? And I was like, okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah, they're raised on these planets, and a lot of the character of the Primarchs and kind of their nature versus nurture, right? They kind of have this inherent nature about them, but the way the planet has nurtured them kind of molds them into a certain type of person. I mean,
Right.
Angron without the butcher's nails, I mean, if he landed on, Gilliman's planet, if he was on Macragge, I mean, he probably would have been a very different individual. But the planet he landed on, I believe it's Dashia. It could be known as something else, but that's the name of the short story, so I think that's it. Like Jay was alluding to, it's a aristocratic world where there is the ruling class, and then everybody else is enslaved. They called the ruling class the High Riders. And Angron makes reference to the fact that they had firearms, they had grenades, they had some level of technology, but they were a very brutal society. And from an early age, Angron was a gladiator. He was a slave his whole life, forced to fight in the pits. And that's where he meets his compatriots, who he talks about in the short story. And, he forms this bond with them. They take these oaths together, and eventually they escape, and they, rebel against the High Riders and slay them and destroy these cities. And, he has this taste of freedom, which is ripped away from him when he is going to make his last stand with his fellow former slaves, his gladiators, his compatriots. Very, very Spartacus in a way, except if Spartacus got beamed up by aliens right before the end. But before he gets that opportunity to die as a free man, he's taken by the Emperor. He doesn't know how his friends died. He wasn't there, despite the oaths they made to each other, and that really haunts them. And I'm gonna read a quote to you, Jay, from the story. And this is Angron talking. "My warriors, my brothers and sisters, Oh, my bray ones, my brothers, my. For several seconds, Angron simply paced, his jaw opening and working soundlessly, his head twisting from side to side. Gone. They are gone. Gone without me. So, that's just the first taste. We'll have some other quotes later, but that's sort of at the beginning of Karn's encounter with Angron. And, this is before Karn really even is talking with Angron, and Angron is fuming over this. Presumably it's been hours, possibly days. He's been down there in this sort of like, it's not really his prison cell because we find out he could have left at any time he wanted to, but sort of like the chambers in which he's kept. Mm-hmm. He's just been railing about this, and understandably so. And later on we find out when the Emperor beamed him up, teleported him onto the ship, Angron, his first reaction to the Emperor sort of, introducing himself and trying to inform Angron of who he really was, is Angron killed a Custodes, like right away. He just kills him. And he's going for the Emperor. He's going to kill the Emperor. And the Emperor teleports him on to the Warhounds, soon-to-be World Eaters, ship and tells them they have to deal with it. But they can't. But he told them you can't hurt him. Not that they would, but they pledged that they would not try to hurt Angron, which shows you that, like, the Emperor, he's a lot of things, but at least, he's not going to condemn his son to death right away. He's going to give him a chance.
Right. Okay. So that was, I guess, another point of confusion I had is like how long was Angron in there, like on that ship? Because it seemed like he was there for a while, given how there's like bodies and stuff down there that seem to have like, I don't know, I got the impression that they were like more or less in a state of decay by the time Karn got there. But
I don't necessarily know if they were decayed. I don't think it had been that long, but it definitely, right. I'd imagine it had been several hours up to like a day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like enough time for several members of the high command of the Legion to go down there and get beaten to death.
Right. Okay. I got it. So, yeah, okay. So, like, a lot of it's clearing up now. Interesting, like, concept, I suppose, would be the Angron's, like, self-employed, like, scarring. The rope.
The rope, yes.
Now, was that based on the rebellion? Every like battle against the rebellion, or were those like the fights, the gladiator fights?
It seemed to me that, and what Jay is describing, that after every victory, at least Angron and his fellows on Deshea, if they would win, they would cut themselves on this rope, which started like the base of their spine and like kind of wrapped around them. Mm-hmm. They would cut themselves, and if they won the battle, they would let it scar cleanly. But if they lost the battle, they would rub dirt from the battleground in which they lost into the wound so it would scar darkly to signify their loss. And Angron sort of like brags that, do you see, like he says to Karn, like, do you see any dark scars on me, or no dark lengths in the rope, meaning he's never lost, which you can kind of understand. He's a Primarch.
Right.
And which that practice is implemented into the World Eaters. They sort of take on these brutal and tribal sort of ways of displaying victory with him. And Angron, there's this one scene, it's not in this book, it's in, I believe it's the second Horus Heresy book, where Garviel Loken, who I've talked about in the previous episode as I think like the best character, at least that I've encountered so far in the Horus Heresy, witnesses the World Eaters sort of like getting pumped up for battle. And it's like Angron is like in the center, surrounded by these World Eaters, and they're all like ritualistically chanting as he leads them in like this like bloodletting ritual where they like cut their own face and bleed before they like charge into battle. So these guys are nuts. Right. They are, and they were nuts before Angron got there, And then when he gets there, he just doubles down, and they're even crazier.
Right.
Jay, what do you think of the World Eaters in general, as a legion, as you've encountered them so far in 40K?
I mean, if you're gonna choose a Chaos God that, I mean, okay, if you're a Space Marine, you're pretty much your primary focus is war, death. I mean, if you're, you know, a loyal Space Marine, then, you know, allegiance to the Emperor. But aside from that, like, your physical purpose is to, you know, win via violence. So, I mean, if you're going to choose a Chaos God, it might as well be Khorne, because, you know, blood is a pretty common result of war, and using weapons like bolters that explode flesh quite nicely. So, I mean, yeah. That's pretty much my exposure to World Eaters is fairly small, usually because when it comes to the models, Chaos Space Marines kind of fall under like only a couple factions that I'm aware of, unless you like go custom with it. I mean, you know, like the Thousand Suns or Plague Marines and stuff like that. But I mean, yeah.
Right. I mean, definitely Khorne is not a fan of psychers, so no magic trickery. He's a big enemy of anyone who's a psyker, you know, so that throws like the Thousand Suns out of his reach, for instance.
Right.
I mean, even going back to your boy Ragnar, if you remember in the first book when he's going through the trials or whatever, when he like leaves his body and he's basically being tempted by all the different chaos gods. The one that kind of he gets the most is Khorne. I mean, Khorne would probably be the guy the Space Wolves like. I mean, they have a little bit of space magic, but they're pretty Khornish, you know. So he has his appeal, but definitely a very natural fit for Angron and the World Eaters to go to Khorne.
Right.
But doubling back around to Angron himself, you know, we kind of need to speak on sort of the tragic character that really is Angron, because, you know, no one's going to sit here and feel too sorry for him, because, I mean, he's a brutal dealer of death, nothing but violence. He enjoys killing people, butchering people. I mean, there are stories during the Heresy where when he's supposedly on the good guy's side, which, you know, you can question that to begin with, but, you know, all the other legions, when they think of the World Eaters, are like, geez, like those guys are brutal. They just go in there and they indiscriminately butcher everybody. Like they are like, but excuse me, but they are like very effective at what they do. They get in there and they get results, and they get them quickly. I mean, if a planet is not compliant and they're like, you know, screw the Emperor, you know, and you don't want some protracted war, World Eaters go in there and they mess them up, and they're good at it. And Angron especially. I mean, they talk about how, you know, when Karn is sort of describing like you were talking about earlier, the battle with the worms on whatever planet that was, he's like, Angron's already like imagining the field of battle and how he would do it, and then he's like, you know, a very capable general, so it's not like he's ignorant to tactics. He just has a sort of like no calm, no quarter. It's just all the way, just gonna take it to him, always moving, hit and run, sort of. I don't even, not just hit, maybe no run, just hit, you know. So he's quite the guy. He's quite the character.
Hit and hit.
Hit and hit. But anyway, this was all a long digression to say that he is a tragic character, I think, because of what happens to him, what he's taken from. Because if we end his story on Deshea, then it's a valiant death. I mean, these enslaved people rose up in rebellion against their brutal masters and did everything in their power to make them pay, make them suffer for the great and great suffering that they have given out to a whole world worth of people. I mean, he says their great grandchildren will still remember, the pain we caused them. But in the last second, taken away. I'm going to read another quote from the short story, and this is also from Angron. And he says, "All this," Angron said softly, "and even my sworn oath wasn't enough." He parted his hands and let Karn crumple to the floor, "because I don't even know how they died." So, and throughout the short story, Angron sort of talks about his compatriots, and he references names and details and descriptions, and Author does a great job of sort of like painting this picture that Angron really was attached to these people. He really loved them, he respected them, and he was ready to die with them. And if he had died there on Deshea, he would have died a hero, and furthermore, he would have died a free man. He would have found his freedom and died for it. That's denied to him by the Emperor. And not only that, upon finding the Emperor, he's pressed into service for him. Now, some Primarchs are more willing than others, but there's no doubt that they all serve the Emperor and do his bidding. And they can't go against him. They cannot go against him. At least they're not supposed to. They do inevitably, but at this point, Angron, I hesitate to call him a slave, because he isn't that. But I wouldn't say he's free either. And that makes his ultimate fall to chaos, I think, explainable in a way. You can see why he went there. From the beginning, he doesn't like the Emperor, what the Emperor did to him. He's always trying to make Karn admit that the Emperor is like a little prissy pants. He keeps trying to compare him to the High Riders. He constantly compares him to his former slave masters. That's what he thinks of him. And even when Karn is like, no, the Emperor, he's good, he's there, he fought with us and stuff. Angron, he really, it's not like he suddenly feels better about the guy. He still doesn't like him. So when he's given the first chance by Horus to betray him, he does. Willingly, easily. He probably doesn't even require any convincing. He's like, well, we're doing it? All right, let's do it. And then when he falls to Khorne, again, a match made in the warp, I suppose you could say. The god of death, of destruction, of battle, of carnage, and the literal walking avatar of that in Angron. Yeah, they're a match made in heaven, so of course Angron gives into him all the power and whatever. I haven't read yet The Fall of Angron, so I don't know exactly what he's tempted with, but I'm sure it's, nothing out of the normal realm of, like, you'll get your revenge, basically. But tragically, Angron goes from slave to a free man. He has that brief taste of freedom, pressed into service by the Emperor, and then ultimately a slave to chaos, a slave to Khorne, and a slave forever. I think it's a pretty tragic arc to his tale.
Right. Do you think as, I guess, a demon prince of Khorne, do you think he even has cognitive thought anymore, to the point where he's like, I'm back to being a slave, or he's like, yeah, I can live with this. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm sure
much power that, yeah, okay.
He's a borderline god.
Yeah.
He's a demon prince. I'm sure the demon prince Angron wouldn't be sitting there like crying about his situation, you know what I mean? But he's corrupted by chaos, Mm-hmm. You don't know how much of who he really was is left to begin with. Right. You know what I mean? Is he more demon or is he more Primarch? We don't know. He's obviously both, but how self-aware is he? I don't know. But I know, at least I get the sense that if the Angron on Deshea saw him in 40K as his demon Primarch, he probably wouldn't like the image he's seeing, Yeah. Because Angron fought for his freedom. It's very Spartacus, He fought for his freedom and for the freedom of his friends. But what does he give his legion? He leads them into eternal service to Khorne. He gives them the opposite of freedom. So, all for the sake of what I assume to be revenge. He wants to give the Emperor his comeuppance.
A lot of the
And
time in stories, it just all comes down to revenge. All for revenge. And then it's
I
usually
mean,
not even worth it in the end in almost every story. But some
yeah,
stories.
I mean, it's a dish best served cold, whatever that means. I guess you don't want to put revenge in the microwave.
Right.
But I think that this dark fall of Angron is brilliantly foreshadowed in the final line of this short story. And to anyone listening, I would highly recommend you read it, despite the fact that we're really kind of, going into it and kind of, this is the last line of the thing, so it's a little bit of a spoiler, but even with me reading this, I think you should read it yourself because very well written, and it really gives you great insight into his character. If you're a World Eaters fan, if you're an Angron fan, if you're a fan of Horus Heresy, or just, you like a quick read, I would recommend it. Anyway, here's the last line. Silently, supporting Karn in their midst, the World Eaters followed their Primarch down into that darkness that stank of blood. I mean, can't get more foreshadowy than that.
Blood for the Blood God.
Blood for the Blood God.
I'd like
I mean,
to... Sorry to cut you off. I'd like to revisit one part where Karn is... They're fighting in the mudworm planet.
Yeah.
Karn brings up the fact that the Emperor at one point joins the battle, right? And
Right.
He recounts how, like, you've never seen the way, like, these things just pretty much exploded and, like, just evaporated.
Right.
Like, in less than a second. And, like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading that and I'm like, what even is that? Is that like psychic power? Like,
I mean, he's just the most powerful being around. I mean, he becomes a god. I mean, the Emperor is insane. I mean, and I think, the most you sort of get, they give reference to the Emperor's prowess is in the Horus Heresy series. But I like how they do it sort of vaguely. Because even when Karn is like saying like he witnessed it, but he can barely describe it, like just
Right.
how powerful he really is. Which goes into showing how powerful Horus was to ultimately
stand a chance. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's some tale that like the Emperor was reluctant to kill his favorite son in the end. Which paints, I think the Emperor is a complicated character, I mean, really. I mean, but he I don't know if he can have it both ways because he seems sometimes he treats the Primarchs like sons and sometimes he just treats them like tools to be disposed of and used at his whim. So,
Old Testament God versus New Testament God, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and he's kind of both at the same time.
Like flip-flopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a confusing character, and I think he's a very ambiguous character. And to be honest, when it comes to the Emperor, for me, the more ambiguous, the more vague, the less described, the better. I think the more you try, because, when there isn't anything concrete and it's all left to the imagination, I think we as readers can sort of imagine this being that is so powerful and potent that, like, we can't even put it to words. So when you try to put it to words, it kind of falls short,
Right.
Inevitably.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense, like, narratively, since, like, with everything kind of being nebulous and stuff, like, a character attempting to describe it that doesn't, like, correspond with a different character makes sense, just given how, like, you can't even comprehend it, the whole
Right.
scope of, like, what he is.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I think the short story After Deshea is a very well written little short story, little piece. I mean, it doesn't you Jay, you personally didn't have a lot of skin in the game with the Horus Heresy series, so you probably you were not everything was kind of coming together, but even
Right.
still,
I mean, as much as I may have, like, been confused at points or, like, certainly, like, missed certain, like, hammer falls, it was still a great thing to read. I mean, like, I was reading it at work and I was, like, almost, like, shirking off responsibility just to be like, how is Karn still taking this beating, dude? Like,
yeah.
this is insane.
Yeah. I mean, it's great too because Karn is also he's a big player in the stories of 30 and 40K, and he's quite himself an impressive warrior. Obviously, he is if he can survive that much of a beating from Angron.
Corn
I'd
on
highly
the
recommend it.
corn.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So after Deshea, super fun read. Really gives you a good clue into Angron as a character, some of his motivation, some of his backstory, and also another example of just how loyal Space Marines are to their Primarchs. I mean, if they're that loyal, where they can stand there and systematically get beaten to death, one after the other, without even raising a hand in return, then yeah, no duh, they're gonna follow them to heresy, to chaos. They'll do anything for their daddy. You know what I mean? So, great story. Highly recommend it.
Yep.
And, while we're here, Jay, why don't we pour one out for Horus's immortal soul now in the clutches of Khorne?
Yeah, you think he's a water guy? Nah, he probably.
No, he's a blood guy.
Yeah, I was about to like consider he probably drinks blood.
Blood. Probably.
Okay. Yeah.
That's not sanitary. Don't try that at home.
No, that's
Unless you're a
probably
vampire.
nutritious, maybe. I don't know.
I'm not going to make the assumption. But thanks for talking with me, Jay, and thanks everybody who listened.
Of course.